Good
evening, everybody. I call this meeting of the South Burlington School Board to order on Wednesday, December 18th, 2024 at 6 p.m. First order of business is announcements and agenda and amendments to the agenda. Do we have any announcements from the board or amendments to the agenda? I would just a couple of changes to the current agenda if we could. I'd like to move the discussion items number 6 past the budget discussion. Everybody's okay with that?
Seems reasonable.
And then the only other item to talk about is in discussion items, we have finance committee. I would just like to add to that potential discussion around board engagement on the budget after we talk about the budget itself this evening. Other than that, any other announcements or amendments? All right.
Could we amend the agenda to put, to move 5A, to the new item 3?
Yes, before comments.
Yes.
Sure. Do we want to do the same with the student representative report or just student spotlight?
Student spotlight,
Just student spotlight.
mindful of the bedtime factor.
All righty. Okay, with that done, we will move on to focus on student learning and student spotlight.
Great, thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. It is my favorite time of the board meeting where I get to share some of the wonderful teaching and learning happening. And so with that, I'm going to welcome Chamberlain art teacher Jenny Goodrich and some of her students. Jenny received the incredible honor where she is, and our students and their ornaments, which feature a variety of diverse perspectives, are on the national tree in Washington, D.C. And Jenny recently had the honor of attending that. Principal Holly Ruel of Chamberlain is here as well. Please feel free to join. You're a big part of this, this success. Pull up a chair. With that, I'm gonna turn it over to Jenny. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you for having me here. It is such an honor to have our students represent the state of Vermont in Washington, D.C. What people don't understand or really know is that there's one large national tree, and then it's surrounded by smaller trees that represent the 50 states. But also Native tribes and other regions like Puerto Rico and Guam. And so we were really, really lucky to have 21 students design ornaments that hang right now currently at our national capital. The whole idea behind it was what makes Vermont beautiful? So that was my question to our students here. What makes Vermont beautiful? And we were able to really take those designs or take those ideas that they have of our natural beauty here in Vermont and to turn them into 21 completely different ornaments. This was not just a Christmas display. However, the National Tree Lighting welcomes people of all nationalities and also just wintertime and celebrating lights and gatherings with families and friends. So I think that was really important to highlight. We were interviewed by Jack Thurston recently from my NBC5 News, and Jack was trying to get like a little question to kind of stick you like right on the air, and he asked, during these polarizing times, why do this? You know, what does this mean for you? And I said, you know, no matter what your politics or your religion or beliefs, we can all be connected through art. And I feel like that really, really resonates in our bulbs, our ornaments that we made. And just fast forward. I'm doing that wrong. No. This first one is created by a student not here. His name is Killian. I had to write, for the national tree ceremony, had to write something. So basically what I just said, here it is in written form, but I'm gonna fast forward. Maybe. I'm doing this wrong. Here are some of our students. We have Aaliyah on the left. She spent a really long time. You know, when you think of Vermont, you cannot not think of maple syrup and sugaring. You know, what's incredible about Chamberlain School is that there's over 37 languages spoken, and I hear that in the art room quite often. My first year here, thank you so much, you here. My first year, I was like amazed to hear student conversation while making art of how do you say this in Arabic? And this is how you say it in French and that sort of thing. So again, I think there's nothing like more beautiful than our students being represented in Washington, DC. We have students that created the hermit thrush, other students that created the Green Mountains, our state fish, the brook trout. And like I said, we were in the news. There is a display with all of the ornaments printed out and scanned at Chamberlain School.
And Lil's here. Lil was one of the.
Lil is here. Yeah, we'll get to Lil's picture in a minute. It was really special to have two students come and visit the tree lighting. It was incredibly cold. It was funny. The emails before were like dress warm, and you're thinking, well, we live in Vermont, and it was unseasonably freezing cold, and we were sitting on metal chairs for hours. So we did dress warm. That's Teo. I don't know who. And then the Vermont tree is very small. All of the state trees are so small with our national tree in the background. And of course, Santa made an appearance. It was actually so cold that President Biden, when he came out, he did the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 countdown in the beginning. They usually save it till after the performances, but people were so cold that some of them chose to go home. So that was incredible to have him there, and Vice President Harris. And fast forward. So I'm gonna have our students that are here, just say your names. Could you say what grade you are? And
my name is Rosalind. I'm in 3rd grade. My name is Lil and I'm in 5th grade. My name is Thomas and I'm in 3rd grade.
And on the left, we have TJ or Thomas's picture. Do you want to say a little something about, like, what did you include in your bulb about what makes Vermont beautiful?
A sunset and the Green Mountains in the back and the Lake Monster and Lake Champlain.
And Lil's is on the right. Do you want to add what you included in your ornament?
I added the hermit thrush in winter, with the sun shining.
And Rosalind's is on the left here. Do you want to talk about yours?
I have the hermit thrush. I have camels up in the background. And next to the hermit thrush, I have a leaf from a sugar maple.
Yeah, so I mean, overall, I feel like this was sort of an experience of a lifetime for us at Chamberlain, so I'm very proud of all of that. Wait, can I add anything?
Well, the other interesting thing, just yesterday, Vermont Fish and Wildlife contacted us because they recognize that we have some incredible conservationists here who are celebrating some of the Vermont species. So some of the ornaments that represent animals native to Vermont are now on the social media page for Vermont Fish and Wildlife. And we're just really, really proud of our students. And Mrs. Goodrich has also been selected as the Vermont Art Teacher of the Year as well,
Which is separate from,
which is separate, but,
yeah, it's a big,
Just honor on honor. on
but
honor.
now we know why.
I am so proud of you all and really appreciate you all coming to share with everyone. This is an important celebration to celebrate our students and our teachers and our administrators. Thank you all for your awesome sharing and just the love you put into this. This is really great. Congrats, Jenny.
thank you, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming and thank you to the parents and guardians who supported this as well. Appreciate you all.
No.
You all are, of course, welcome to stay or head out if you prefer.
All right, moving on. Our next agenda item is public comment. So this is the community's opportunity to share questions, feedback, and concerns with the board. We ask that you keep your comments concise, between 2 to 3 minutes, and that you refrain from using any information that would identify a specific person. Please raise your hand in the room or use the Zoom raised hand feature. We'll only use the online chat to manage tech issues. We're not able to take action on any issues brought to us during public comment. However, any board member may suggest tonight that the issue or question be added to a future agenda for discussion. We may also delegate addressing issues to our superintendent, Violet Nichols. And it's always helpful if you can email us a copy of your comments for follow-up. Just one note, if you're here to comment on the budget, we'll have plenty of time after the budget presentation and section to take comments on the budget. So is there anybody in the room who would like to make a public comment? Just raise your hand, come up and identify yourself.
My name is Mark Gable. I'm the parent of a Nordic athlete. I was hoping that I would not be the one who had to speak tonight, but the person who thought she was going to come and speak is having to drive her kid to basketball because she wasn't in the bus. So, as of this week, for the first time in 7 years, the South Burlington Nordic program no longer has dependable transportation to go and come to Sleepy Hollow. It's a real loss. We had a bus, I'm sorry, I'm a parent. My child's bus went into a ditch the first night of Nordic season. It was a perfect storm. Things were rough. So, 7 years of driving of buses going to Sleepy Hollow. There's only been a couple of instances like this. But rather than addressing the source, the administration has pulled the plug on transportation to Sleepy Hollow. And the answer as of yesterday was to put inexperienced young drivers in carpools to take their own cars to Sleepy Hollow where there's limited cell service. The road is mud. And it is difficult from what I've heard in a bus, but there's safety in numbers and it keeps the students together. Asking young drivers to transport themselves out there is, in my opinion, a very unwise choice and shows a lack of understanding on the part of the administration that should be addressed, and it should be addressed immediately. Because to my knowledge, there's no plan for tomorrow night either, and the students will be heading back out there again. Thank you.
Is there anyone else in the room who would like to make public comment? Okay, seeing none, looking online, I see no hands raised. All right, with that, there's no more public comment. We'll move on to the next item. And actually, the next item is introduction of new board member, and I would just like to, I want to welcome Karen, but I also want to, if we can push that one down a little bit, I'd like Chelsea to do the actual introduction, if you don't mind. So I'd love to do it, but, and I see our chairperson in the room, so if there are no objections, I'll hand the chair back over to Chelsea.
Welcome, Karen. We're excited to have you as part of the team. Thank you. And you're coming on right at the right time, so thank you. Thank you. All right, did we make any amendments?
We only moved, no amendments, we simply moved some items around.
All right, agenda item 5, student representative report.
Thank you. Unfortunately, Alan cannot be here today due to travel, so it will just be me, but, we have 3 announcements. The first is the SBHS Music Christmas Tree Pickup is happening on January 11th. If you live in South Burlington and would like to participate, please leave your tree on your curb no later than 10 a.m. on the 11th with a check made out to SBHS Music of $15 for small and medium-sized trees and $20 for large trees. All profits go to new instruments and musical experiences for SBHS students. Last week or last board meeting, we discussed that the RMCS and Chamberlain Winter Concerts are happening tonight. We are excited to also announce that in addition to these evening performances, RMCS students will also be singing at the City Hall Auditorium during the day this Friday, December 20th. City employees are invited to enjoy this concert with kindergarten and grade 1 performing at 9 a.m. 3rd and 5th graders at 10 a.m. and 2nd and 4th graders at 1 p.m. And this is also a reminder to students and families that winter break is this coming Monday, December 23rd through Wednesday, January 1st. Students will come back to school on Thursday, January 2nd.
Thank you. All right, that brings us to agenda item 6, discussion items. We have finance committee 1 to 4.
I'm
session.
sorry, we moved that to after the budget discussion.
Okay. Well, what do we think? Do we want to recess at 6:17 p.m.? We'd like to move that as well. Okay, we have budget warrant for 7:05. I'm wondering if we should consider reviewing our policy first, just to give more people time, or do we want to jump right into budget?
I think,
Yeah,
I,
way ahead.
can I offer that we do revised policy since I don't think that was gonna take a lot of time. We can get through that pretty quickly.
Everybody amenable to that? So we were gonna move up action items, agenda item 9.
Oh,
It's our third reading.
Okay, yeah, okay, sorry. Yep, great.
All right, agenda item 9, third reading of revised E2 security camera policy. Do we have any questions on the revised policy? So just some housekeeping. This is our third reading, which means that we have at 2 meetings ago, we read through the whole policy and discussed it. Last meeting, we made any additional revisions or edits that we thought were necessary, and this is the last meeting to discuss before we approve.
I just want to know, I appreciate the addition in storage security to item number 4, which is regarding the retention overall of the footage. So thank you for adding that in.
Thank you. Any questions, comments? Okay. Do I have a motion to approve the revised South Burlington District Policy E2 security cameras as currently written?
So moved.
Chris moves. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Laura seconds. Any discussion? All in favor, signify by saying aye.
I
The motion.
I'll abstain.
The motion passes with 1 abstention. All right, that took 2 minutes. I think we should move on to budget if you're all set.
Yeah,
Great. So
I think
agenda
that's what
item
most people want to discuss.
8.
Yeah, we're gonna do it.
FY26 budget.
All right, I'm gonna screen share here.
Okay. That looking good, online, in person? All right, well, welcome. Thank you everyone for being here. Really glad to have a robust community discussion and to help in this process, I'm going to welcome the team who's been working closely on this. Tim Jarvis, Senior Director of Finance and Operations. April Jennings, Business Manager, Monica DeRochers, Director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, Anti-Racism, and Social Emotional Learning, Kristen Romick, Executive Director of Education Support Systems, and Jody Valancourt, Executive Director of Learning, who is joining us virtually this evening. And sorry, folks, I didn't put two tables up here, but we'll pull.
I think April can probably just.
All right, perfect. Thank you. I added a bunch of chairs was my focus when we were setting up. Thank you, Bridget. Thank you. Thanks. So, this was an extremely difficult budget to put together. We knew that we were facing, the real fact that we had really limited financial supports this year and far more diminished than any other year that we've faced. So this is undoubtedly the hardest budget season we've faced as a district. And when we're, tasked with, we're really maintaining a high quality of education to support our students. We have to think about what we value most. And so we went to our ends policy, which is our vision for learning. So it is our ultimate goal of what we're supposed to achieve. And with this, we took a real focus here on equity and trying to preserve equity for our students at the very heart of this. None of these reductions are going to make outcomes better for students or teachers. We know that. But when we're thinking about what are we really trying to achieve and preserve, we are trying to look at going beyond formal equality and look at achieving equity where there might be an unequal distribution of resources due to the impact of historic marginalization. So this budget was developed to try to maximize equity where we could for groups whose qualitative and quantitative assessment information is showing some more significant needs. We also have to adhere to legislative requirements and regulatory requirements. So there are requirements by the Agency of Education that we've got to attend to, legal aspects in order to achieve our ends. And really try to provide this at a cost that our community will support. As most of us in the room know, we had 2 failed budgets last year. And that was really difficult on our students, our staff, and our families. With our RIF and bump process, those votes meant that our staff was really put through a great deal of trauma. So trying to minimize that to the extent that we can this year. So due to the impacts of Act 127 and the use of 2 fiscal years of surplus funds last year to maintain what we could this year, we are going to be reviewing some really drastic reductions, trying to achieve tax rates that are near historic averages. And all right, Nick, we'll see if the clicker works. It does. So to talk through a little bit more about what was included in this budget, I'm going to welcome Jody Valancourt, Executive Director of Learning, to talk through some compliance pieces and where we have requirements to meet.
Okay, so there are some requirements related to different laws, and also the education quality standards that we have to ensure that we are maintaining. Act 173 does require us to provide supports for students who struggle in school. And so that, of course, comes with the need for specialists and roles like that. Act 139 is a very recent piece of legislation related to early literacy. There is a requirement in that law that has to do with the instruction that's happening and ensuring that we are providing explicit instruction using evidence-based instructional materials. And there also is a piece in that law related to screening students for their reading skills in the early grades. And then the education quality standards also outline the different required content. It does address some ratio requirements in terms of things like nursing, ensuring that you have like a nurse for so many students, those kinds of ratios. And then, of course, there's the alignment with the South Burlington board policies, including the equity policy and the ENDS policy, both which Violet just spoke about in the vision slide.
Jody, I think this was you too.
Oh, this one is me as well. I'm sorry.
It's okay. You can do it.
Okay, so it looks like this is about connecting the vision that we just talked about and the approach for the budgeting. So I see the ends policy here, the lifelong learning, the personal development, the citizenship, and the academic proficiency. Those are our expected outcomes for our students after their experience in South Burlington School District. And that requires the combined effort of central office leadership and building administrators, faculty and staff, and school board and community.
Thank you, Jody.
I think this is me. So we discussed these factors at the last meeting, but for those who were not here, or just to refresh everybody, these are the factors, some of the factors, major factors that are impacting our budget planning for FY26. As Violet mentioned, our current budget was passed on its third try with a 8.18% increase in homestead property taxes, because we were able to use the previous year's surplus to pay down our net education spending. And thus, we had a very good outcome in fiscal year 25 compared to the rest of Chittenden County and statewide, which we do not have, unfortunately, at our disposal this cycle. We received the December 1st letter from the state's tax department, which we discussed at the last meeting as well. Both the yield, which is a very major factor in the education funding formula, and South Burlington CLA were more favorable than we had originally expected. The yield, we had the opportunity last Friday to attend our monthly, it's called VASBO, it's the Vermont Association of School Business Officers. So basically, my and April's colleagues across the state, and everybody was still very, very surprised at how low the yield was, and are trying to understand exactly where the yield is going to end up, because it seems like it's such a disproportionate cut from last year, but they're going to have to find other funding sources in order to fund even a modest increase in expenses across the state. But nevertheless, that is the number we have. will remind you that that number is not finalized until the end of the legislative session, in next spring. And yet it's a critical factor for what our tax rate's gonna be, starting on July 1st next year. The CLA, which is the real estate inflation factor, we thought it was gonna be even lower than 75%. I would also tell you that this is still an estimate. Although we would expect, if it's consistent with previous years, that we will get a final official number around New Year's Day, to help us celebrate that week of joy. So, those two factors are still undecided. The pupil count, which I'll show you a slide, in a little bit about the details of that. Those are also lower than they were in last year's budget cycle. So that causes a negative impact on our tax rate. This is a number that swirls around a lot. And so they sent us our first version of the pupil count, and everybody was kind of in an uproar because they didn't seem right. There seemed to be some fundamental flaw in the way that the state had calculated it in its first round. And again, at this meeting we had last week, we heard from the Agency of Education that in fact there had been a number of mechanical issues with their first version. We just got our second version a few days ago. And although it's still lower than what the count was last year, it's better than the first round. And I'll just remind you that last year, we didn't get our final count until version 6. And that was like well into January after we had already formed our budget. So unfortunately, the timing of all of these state provided factors are not aligned with the way that we warn and vote on our budgets. So things could literally change day by day. And we have a calculator that we change the numbers and you see what the new numbers are that come out of it. But it's discomforting that these numbers are not solid at the time that we're discussing the budget and options that we have with the budget. But that is just a statement of fact, and an unfortunate one. Some other macro factors, most economists, the Federal Reserve are estimating fiscal year 26 inflation rates of around 2.5%, which is better than in previous years, which is good. We have both the teachers union support staff bargaining agreements expiring at the end of this fiscal year, so on June 30th. So negotiations are commencing to review that and to seek agreement on a new contract. And then the state mandated contribution that we need to make to the employee health benefits program is proposed to increase by 11.9%. That alone increases our expenditures by about $900,000. So that is not an insignificant number, and we have zero control over it. So that is decided by the state. We hadn't included an enrollment slide before, but at the recommendation of some city people, we put one in for this presentation. So this shows you what our pre-kindergarten to grade 12 enrollment numbers are. And the way we structured this was on the far left, you have it by school, and then there's an elementary subtotal. December 2023 and December 2024 are actual numbers that are provided by our data group within the district as a baseline. And then for fiscal year 26 through fiscal year 30, these are the numbers that are provided by the latest sort of independent data, which was the McKibbin's demographic research report, which was published in October 2023. So you'll see a fairly big jump between December 2024 and fiscal year 26. which is, next fiscal year. And what I will point out about this is that this is a detailed, report. And I have the link to it in this presentation. So when this presentation gets posted to the website, it's already in there from last year's budget materials, but if you want to take a look at it, it's a scientific approach to projecting both population and enrollment. It's way beyond my skill set to understand all of the nuances of it, but they look at mortality rates and building rates and 20, 30 individual factors that go into the calculation of this. What I was, what I'm always, I wouldn't say surprised, but I'm always interested in knowing how do those projections line up against reality, right? Because there's no way that anybody knows exactly how many students are going to be enrolled in our schools from year to year, let alone 5 years from now. And for the December 2024, which is our current enrollment as of this month, McKibbin's was estimating that we would have about 68 more students than we do. And almost all of that was in the elementary schools. The high school and the middle school were within 2 or 3 of actuals, which I thought was pretty good. But for whatever reason causes our elementary population to be less than they expected. That's just a fact, right? And so I wouldn't say that completely discounts the analysis because it's the best we have to go by. But I will just indicate that I think if it's overestimating our elementary population by 68 students now, I'm not fully confident that this fiscal year 26 elementary total of 1131 is going to be achieved. It's just something to keep in mind. But we wanted to share this with you. And if you're interested in the science behind this, I would invite you to look at the report. It's about 24 pages long. It's filled with statistics and commentary and whatnot. But as a important point in considering, especially for future years, where our budgeting is based on, I just want to share this with you tonight. The next slide is again, every time we say long-term weighted average daily membership, people's eyes glaze over. So I prefer to just call it our pupil counts. I wanted to just, again, as a point of reference, I wanted to include probably more detail on this slide than is necessary because most people would probably only be interested in the last column on the right, which is like, what's the total? But I thought it would be interesting to include this data and show you where it's moving and where it is versus last year. So the way you read this is that there's a starting pupil count, which is in the second column, and that's the 2-year average ADM plus state place students. So that's kind of where your starting point is. And then if you remember from Act 127 and the many discussions we had about that last year, the state introduced a new methodology for adding or subtracting weights to different categories of students. And you'll see on the note below that grades 1 through 5 are considered neutral. So you get no extra points for grades 1 through 5, and you don't get any deductions for grade 1 through 5. It's considered completely neutral. And that is sort of the model that the state uses for determining whether additional from a grade perspective, whether additional weight should be assigned or not. So for early education, pre-K, it's actually a negative weight. So when you move, when you add early education pre-K students, your relative total actually goes down. I guess the assumption there is that fewer resources are required, and I'm not saying I'm the expert in this, I'm not. The concept is that fewer resources are required to teach early education or pre-K versus the neutral, which is grades 1 through 5. Whether that's true or not, I'm sure we could invite some pre-K teachers up here who could easily argue against that state assumption. Middle school, you get a little bit of an extra weight for your middle school population. High school, you get a little bit of extra weight. Where the numbers really move more significantly is with economic disadvantaged students and with English language learning students, where you can see the weights are pretty significant to add to your total score, so to speak. The economic disadvantage category in FRL stands for free and reduced lunch, even though the state now has universal meals. There is still a view towards determining whether any student would be eligible for free and reduced lunch based upon certain statistical information around family income, whether or not they are on Medicaid and things like that. And this is probably, I think the economic disadvantage column is the one that was causing the most consternation between version 1 and version 2, and probably will continue because, first of all, it's fed by multiple data sources, including direct certification. You know, we ask families to actually fill out a direct certification form that is used to determine whether or not they would be eligible for one of these weights. We get Medicaid data. There's a variety of different ways this happens, and from what I understand, the reason why there has been a statewide drop in this FRL weight, and you can see last year we had 780 and it dropped down to 751, is because the state had actually suspended some of the rules about rolling over from one year to the next because of COVID. And so it wasn't necessary for people to recertify themselves as being eligible. It kind of rolled over from fiscal year 24 to fiscal year 25, whether you recertified your family or not. And then I think that for fiscal year 26, for the first time, they're going back to the original methodology of trying to more proactively certify whether a particular student was eligible for this weight or not. So that caused a lot of the sort of, concern from many towns. Why is my FRL weight low? Why has it dropped? And that's the reason. And it's a very complicated statistic that the state uses. And if anyone is interested in pursuing those details, we'd be happy to share them. But suffice it to say that the FRL weight did not help us. The figures in red and parentheses at the bottom of the slide indicate that those are changes that have had a negative impact on our total count. And you can see in the far right lower column, our total number dropped by 67.34. And so you probably like, what does that mean? Right? I mean, it's a number, but it's pretty significant because just that number alone in the education funding formula increases our tax rate by almost 2% from what it would have been otherwise. So if it would have been a 4% increase, now it's close to a 6% increase, just because the LTW ADM has changed. Again, these aren't final. I'll repeat, we had 6 versions last year. It's probably, I work closely with our data team in the district, and they're deep in the weeds of this stuff. And they basically have to reconcile the status of every single student we have in our district against these criteria. So we're working closely with them and with the state to tweak this to make sure it's right, and that we're not missing out on the possibility of increasing our number, which is what you want to do in this case. And I think those are a lot of the state and macro factors, and now I'm gonna, I think, move over to Kristen.
Yeah, thanks.
Excuse me. So as we navigate the complexities of balancing our district's financial realities with our steadfast commitment to high quality education, I'm going to start sharing some of what the adjustments or the possible adjustments we're going to discuss now are. So the adjustments are up on the screen. There'll be 2 slides that I'll be showing you. I'm not going to read the slides. But just going to share some of that information with everyone. Last year, we faced difficult decisions, including the reduction of middle school instructional leaders and informational technology educators. This year, we're proposing additional adjustments that include the reduction of 3 elementary instructional coaches, the remaining information technology educator, as well as the curriculum area supervisor model. We recognize that changes like transitioning away from the CAS model, the curriculum area supervisor model, may feel like a step backward. However, our intent is to realign our resources to ensure leadership and support remain sustainable while adapting to our current financial realities. The proposed transition to a teacher leader model, which is reflected in the slides up ahead of us, is to transition, reflects the realignment. While this model will not replicate the structure or the capacity of our current system, it creates a collaborative framework leveraging the expertise and insights of our really skilled K-12 educators. By prioritizing our student-facing teachers, this approach maintains essential leadership functions and aligns more closely with effective practices in other districts in our area. At the same time, we're prioritizing critical areas of student support. And you can go to the next slide. That'll just, again, show more information. Special education, adding a K-12 program manager to strengthen the services in special education. Health services, establishing a district health supervisor to address overall student wellness. And in student support, we'll continue to maintain vital roles, including our 9th grade dean, our director of student counseling, our athletic director, are all continued areas of support. Absolutely, maybe.
If you want to move the mic to have the red on it, actually,
That one?
Thank you.
Yeah.
And then make sure that green, the button is illuminated with green lighting.
Yep. Okay.
You can.
And Kristen, sorry, could you repeat what you just said? Because it's important about what you were maintaining.
Yes, absolutely. So while it doesn't replicate the structure or capacity of our current system, it creates a collaborative framework leveraging the expertise and insights of our skilled K-12 educators. By prioritizing student-facing teachers, this approach maintains essential leadership functions and aligns more closely with the effective practices that are in other districts in our area. At the same time, we're prioritizing critical areas of student support. So in special ed, we're adding a K-12 program manager to strengthen our services. We're establishing a district health supervisor to address overall student wellness. And in student support, we're maintaining vital roles, including the 9th grade dean, the director of student counseling services, and our athletic director. We believe these strategic adjustments will help us continue to meet the diverse needs of our students, foster professional growth for our educators, and responsibly manage district resources. And I will pass it over to you, Monica.
All right, so just as Kristen said, I'm gonna reiterate that each of these positions are incredibly valuable, and there will be negative impact on student learning and wellness in each of these positions. Chamberlain Elementary will have a possible reduction of an instructional coach, part of a school counselor, a reduction in days of the SEL coach contract, and behavior analyst. Rick Marcotte will also have a reduction of instructional coach, reduction of classroom teacher, part of a school counselor, and reduction of days of the SEL coach. Orchard Elementary to discuss is a reduction of the instructional coach, a classroom teacher, part of a school counselor, part of a registrar, half of a library media tech, reduction in days of an SEL coach, and the proposed addition of behavior facilitator.
Tuttle Middle School, reduction of part of a nurse, reduction of part of a gen ed clerical assistant, reduction of part of STEAM teacher, and the potential addition of a board certified behavior analyst. Athletics, fall, winter, and spring, reduction of site administration, which means no night games, including football. The potential reduction of JV football, fall cheer, JVB boys soccer, JVB boys basketball, JVB baseball, gymnastics, reduction in uniforms, equipment, and general supplies. South Burlington High School has the reduction of 3 paraeducators, reduction of a social studies teacher, a science teacher, an English teacher, a math teacher, a school counselor, part of the library media tech, substitute coordinator, part of an EST coordinator, part of a career development center coordinator, part of a guidance admin assistant, and part of a nurse.
So, of course, these adjustments would have an impact. And because of that, we tried to engage in a process for our budget development and decision-making that included multiple stakeholders. So we asked principals to consult with their staff to get feedback and to submit proposed budget line item and staff reductions to Tim and April and Violet and Kristen and Monica and myself. In conjunction with looking at that school-based feedback, we reviewed feedback from the community survey, the finance committee. We looked at student social and emotional learning data as well as achievement data. There was a review of alignment with other local school districts regarding structures and best practices. And then we incorporated board direction and the budget factors of real estate inflation and tax rate factors. That being said, it is important, it's critical to acknowledge the impact of the adjustments that were just discussed. Those proposed adjustments do preserve arts programming as well as advanced placement curriculum, but they do also include the elimination of instructional supports such as coaching, ITE, and the CAS model. It would be critical to ensure that we have a system for incorporating teacher leadership K through 12. Teacher leadership is absolutely a critical factor. Another impact is the reduction of administration, and the impact of administration is tricky because oftentimes it's invisible, but you know that it's going well when things are going well. So that would be a major impact as well on students and teachers and the district. The reduction of nursing services for students would be incredibly challenging. Our students have fantastic relationships with our nurses, and that provides them with services that they might struggle to access other places. We would be looking at an increase in class sizes, and in larger class sizes, it is more difficult to create and maintain those strong relationships with students that are critical for the highest levels of learning. It also would require a reduction in athletics and co-curricular offerings, which oftentimes are the high point of students' experiences in school. They form such strong relationships through these and learn so many of those critical skills that are connected to learning in the classroom and learning outside of the classroom as well. And then also the reduction of pre-kindergarten programming. And we know that the vertical alignment of curriculum from pre-kindergarten all the way up through the end of high school is one of the high leverage actions that you can take to increase achievement.
This is a slide showing what our staff changes have been over the last 3 years. So in fiscal year 24, we were coming out of ESSER funding and consequently had to reduce our FTEs by almost 24. Even though these were ESSER funded and not within the general fund, they were very critical individuals who were servicing our students. I think it's important to maintain that differential. Forget about who's funding it. We needed those positions and we suffered by needing to cut them. Last year, largely because of our ability to use the surplus to lower our net ed spending, we had a net reduction of almost 7 FTEs. And then if you add and subtract all the numbers on those previous slides, 8 through 11, it results in a net reduction of a little over 16 FTEs, which includes a net of the additions and the eliminations. So that's the sum total of what was on those slides that Crystal and Monica reviewed. That put us in a position of creating models. I mean, there's an infinite number of models that you can do. But what we were working with was 3 primary models. The first model was incorporating the changes that we just described, both in staffing and programming and facilities and everything that was included. So we're sort of a ring-fenced model 1. There's a model 2, which is taking out some of those cuts and preserving things like nursing for providing some additional instructional supports and having fewer reductions in general across admin and leadership positions. And then there's a model 3, which is putting some more things back into the budget, such as pre-K programming, more instructional supports, fewer athletic reductions, etc. So there's basically 3 general models, and I think we wanted to intentionally call these models as opposed to options, because I remember last year when we were going and everything was crazy and changing by the minute and laws were changing and we had like, do you want option 1, option 2, or option 3? And I think the board felt like, okay, well, I guess I have to choose one of those 3 options. And I didn't think that was necessarily correct to phrase it that way. So what we're talking about is really general models. But the only way you can calculate tax rates is if you have numbers. And I keep stressing this to everybody that I need numbers in order to do that. So these are the financial impacts of those 3 models. So it's split up into 2 columns. One is the impact on general fund expenditures. And one is what would the impact on the homestead tax rate be? And again, the homestead tax rate increase is using the current yield and the current pupil count, both of which are subject to change. But given where those factors are as we sit here tonight, model 1 which would obviously have the more significant cuts, reductions, would result in a increase in expenses of 6.81% and an impact on homestead tax rate of 6.65. So in all of these models, just the way the math works is that the impact on the general fund is pretty consistent with what the impact would be on taxes. We felt that it was important to show a range. We know that the state in their 12-1 letter expects and predicts that the increase on the tax rate will be around the 6% mark, 5.9%. We also know that there are many people in influential positions in the state government who want that number to be much, much lower. And some are asking for a cut, but below zero. Some are cutting for significantly below 6%. All right, so we just wanted to demonstrate what different models would look like under current financial factors. And this is what these models look like. The next slide is the yield. So as I mentioned before, the yield is probably the most important swing factor here between what happens between today and July 1st, when the new budget goes into effect and when our taxes are being calculated, because a relatively modest change in the yield will create a very significant increase in our tax rates. And you can model this out across any number, any range you'd like. But I really just wanted to highlight that as long as the yield is unknown, the impact on our tax rates is unknown, and then it can move. We didn't want to use these as a fear-mongering slide, but I also didn't want to be in the position of, if the yield does drop 10%, to say, by the way, your taxes now are going up 14%, and it's, well, Tim, you told us that they were only going to go up 6%, right? So it's really just for educational purposes that people understand both the complexity of this formula as well as the variability of the formula using factors that we have no control over. So just for reference, again, we just presented some different models with different yields, which, as you can see, produce very different impacts.
Thank you, Tim. Yeah, this is difficult, to be transparent about factors when it's shifting sand. Working on these slides and, working with administrators today to bring positions back after our second LTW ADM yielded just over 28 more students, right? So the numbers shifting is something that we have had to really navigate in real time. And, please know that we're going to maximize every percentage of ground that we gain to maintain critical staff to support our students. Meeting the, achieving the ends is our ultimate goal. And given the complexity and the extremely limited resources that we're seeing here, based on 127, our LTW ADM weights, and factors ranging from health insurance costs across the boards, not to mention our significant facilities needs. We're in a very difficult position, one that's unprecedented, and there's glum faces across the board for good reason. This is not a time as a superintendent that I ever thought I'd have to be in, having these conversations with you all tonight. Yet, this is a time where it's going to call for us all to have significant resolve to do what we can to support our students and our staff and one another during this time. And, we're going to remain committed to achieving our ends in support of all students. throughout this process, supporting our valued staff is incredibly important, as well as our students and our families, parents and guardians. Due to the impact of Act 127 and our use of surplus funds, significant reductions are going to have to be made. We're striving to preserve the equity of services for students who require additional support, and to close the equity gaps that are persistent and longstanding within our district. We're identified by the Agency of Education for these persistent equity gaps, and we have a responsibility to address them. We believe that this budget is developed to maximize equity, to adhere to regulatory and legislative requirements, and come at a cost that the South Burlington community can sustain in order to achieve our ends. And finally, I just want to thank you all for your support, for all that you do being here tonight.
Open it up to board discussion, board members, questions, comments.
I'll start. I always have them. Can we go to the slide where you talked about impact on the, showed us the different, increases based on some of the yields. I can't remember which slide it was 2 or 3 back. Just a question, Tim, as I go back a slide. Yeah, this one right here. When we have impact on general fund expenditures, is that the increase in our ed spending from year over year? So are we talking, like last year, our ed spending was 52 million, I think, and what I'm not seeing here are the numbers around what our revenues are and our ed spending. So to get to this homestead tax rate, you must have calculated all of that already, right?
It's actually just based on expenditures because we were focused on spending. We could provide those numbers for net and spending.
Yeah, I'm curious if you've got those numbers around what our net ed spending increase is, because I'm trying to understand how much we're increasing ed spending from last year.
Yeah, I mean, the net ed spending increase, I would presume, is significantly higher because the $3 million surplus was applied as an offset last year. And isn't there this year. So our revenues, which the surplus was included as part of those revenues in the calculation at least, isn't there. So we started, like, for net ed spending, we started $3 million in forward.
Okay. Are we gonna get those? When do we see those numbers? I guess I'm curious.
I may get them in a few minutes.
Okay.
If you can ask somebody else a question.
Sure. As we look at, I noticed in one of the models, we were looking to carve out some monies for our capital reserve fund, which I think is absolutely necessary to do. I'm wondering, as we look at the dollars here, I was looking at the stewardship plan, and we had close to $3 million called out for fiscal year 26 in the stewardship plan, with 2 million against bond. Is that 2 million already approved monies in a bond, and we were budgeting 700,000 for, or something like that, rough figures?
Yeah, the bond that was approved in March of 23 was the $14.55 million bond. The capital improvements.
Okay.
Typically have a few years to spend it. 6 million of that was for the construction of exams. And then I believe we have, probably, I think 4.5 million of unspent capital approved bond money. Versus a laundry list of projects, which is like multiples of that number, right? Because part of that bond money, was originally intended to fund some major renovations and restructures in the high school and middle school bathrooms and things like that. And then we went out and we worked with Doran Whittier to try to find contractors to give us bids on that. And we couldn't even get anyone to bid on it. But they told us that the number of dollars that we were earmarking for those projects was millions of dollars less than it was actually going to cost. And so we had to address more near-term issues, especially with roofing. And our HVAC systems, and we were able to put the heat pumps in the Rick Marcotte and Orchard School to provide them with air conditioning, which was a significant issue that we were dealing with, as well as a number of other enhancements, the HVAC controls. I mean, everything was geared towards what is the best use of the bond money that we could address sooner rather than later. We also at that time didn't know about PCVs, and we didn't know whether we were going to be facing a situation where we would require significant bond money to pay for remediation and abatement of a PCV situation. Fortunately, as the testing was winding up, for the schools that were on the list, we did not have to do that. So it gives us a little extra money that we would have allocated otherwise to that. So a short answer to your short question is yes, there is still money available to use in the capital reserve fund. I think the inclusion of the 250,000 was simply to ensure that the savings plan for the facilities stewardship fund would not be ignored. You know, last year, at one point, we were gonna add over $1 million to it, and, you know, that got ticked off the list right away, or close to the end, to drive the tax rate down.
3
So
years
we didn't
ago,
put anything in.
yeah, 3 years ago, we had less than $50,000 in our capital maintenance account. And we said every year we're going to commit to contributing to this because we have such significant facilities needs, which impact our students' ability to learn. I mean, all of our students can't even enter every class in the high school, right? So last year we contributed a modest amount for fiscal year 24. Fiscal year 25, it was reduced to try to reduce the number of staff that were RIFT. And then in each of these models, there's an inclusion of $250,000 toward that capital maintenance account.
And we've heard, I think, pretty clearly from the community that the facilities are one of the biggest issues on their minds. So I think that's.
You could ask some of the folks in the room who are shop vacuuming their walls, truly.
Sure. So what I'm understanding is, so I'm just looking at the fiscal year 26 stewardship plan. So there's bond amount in there of 2.3 million. So that would come out of the available 4 million that we've got right now.
If we find people to actually
Do the work, okay. So we're looking at the bond money we have available right now would potentially cover us for fiscal years 26 and 27. If we're lucky.
Yeah, I mean, those projects have not gone out to bid, so.
Yeah.
If our facilities manager, who is pretty good at his job, estimates it at 500,000 for a particular line item. If it goes up to bid, I don't know what it's gonna be. Could be $1 million, could be 1.5 million. You know, and then you really just need to decide relative prioritization. Here's an example. So just a few weeks ago, the boiler at Chamberlain, which is like 60 years old, essentially dissolved and required immediate replacement, right? That was over $100,000. You know, that was presented to the board and we approved it, right? So there's another one just like it at Chamberlain, and there's more like them at the other schools. And so we're reaching a period in the life cycle of these buildings that all of this equipment and machinery is gonna need to be replaced. And that's why you need this money set aside, because if the boiler at Rick Marcotte, same thing happens to it, you need to have that $100,000 to go and pay it. pay for it. You don't necessarily think that's how you're gonna use that money, but you have to have a reserve in place to deal with emergencies like that. And,
I've just pulled up our slide and I want to just draw your attention to the facilities section here. So it's including 250,000 for the capital reserve fund. But there will be what we're referring to as kicking the can down the road here. I mean, the significant reductions that were made in the facilities budgeting should be highlighted. You know, we're canceling cleaning at central office. This budget would be a reduction of cleaning services and standards at every school. And it would include deferring building maintenance. The state is having discussions about a construction maintenance reserve fund, which was eliminated a long time ago. There's a fair amount of pressure from superintendents to bring this back. The secretary shared that there's conversation about movement there, but it's something that is badly needed. And, you know, the idea that we put a set amount into this reserve fund for, you know, high school and middle school new builds or renovations is important. But it would have to be combined with significant revenue sources other than simply, you know, the savings account over time. And with that, you know, the shaving down of the facilities budget to retain staff and programming to the extent possible certainly includes deferred building maintenance.
So just, I guess, comment to the board is this, and I guess to you as well, Weil and Tim, I mean, are we looking at going back to the community in the near future with the bond proposals? We look at what potentially is going to have to be done. Because I think this was the sort of the deal with the devil we made several years ago when we voted on the school and said, no, we don't want the new schools. We understood it was going to be sort of this ongoing potential bond issue.
well, we certainly knew after what we went through last year with the vote, that we weren't gonna propose a bond this year.
Yeah.
So there's no possibility of that, right? We're not thinking about that. And it's more to do, I think, with the strategic decision-making around how to spend the money that we still have and where should it go. Focusing on health and safety, you know, like, you no PCBs, that's great, right? But we've done a lot of roofing as an example, but it's not all done. So some of the projects included in the facility stewardship plan is to finish all the roofing at the schools to ensure that we have a good, you know, 10 to 20 year life cycle, that we don't do any more roofing. We are getting bids on repaving the parking lot between the high school and the middle school, which is a wreck. And possibly doing some of the other, you know, sidewalks and things, because that can be a safety issue as well. But we don't have enough money to, you know, what we wish we had was enough money to do like major changes. And I don't mean just building a new high school and middle school, which was voted down decisively, right? But changing the traffic flow around the high school, it's a nightmare. I mean, anyone who's ever picked up your kid at the high school or middle school at 3:30, it's like, I hope you have an extra half hour to 45 minutes to wait and not do anything else because you're gonna be in line. So, you know, major window projects may not be as important right now because there weren't PCBs, and that's where we thought some of the PCBs might be. Because there were some discovered in the high school a few years ago, but not in this current round of PCB testing. So we have to put the money where it's going to be best utilized for, I think, health and safety first and foremost. And there are certain limitations in these old buildings that you can't just like start knocking down load bearing walls, and we like even some of the handicap access. I think you mentioned about it, like, you know, there's some rooms in the high school you can't get wheelchairs or other, can't provide access, so that's important too. But it will be, it will take some resolve to put another bond in front of the voters. Because this scenario of spending is not really likely to change in the next couple of years. And so there's gonna be pressure every single year. What our tax capacity is to fund the state's education funding, right? And so we all hope that the work being done by the state, by this joint committee on the future education or future state of education in Vermont, how to address some of the chronic funding issues, the funding formula, the fairness of it, the ongoing necessity or appetite for funding schools that have a handful of kids in them, and they need a principal, and they need admin, and they need a lot of things, right? It's still too early to tell whether those changes are going to significantly impact basically the yield that are used, or if they're gonna change the formula altogether and not have property tax be the dominant item, right? I mean, we would love to be in a situation where we didn't have to talk about property tax. Right? It's like, focus on educational outcomes, focus on spending per pupil, focus on are you managing expenses in a reasonable way versus everything directed at the tax rate, which I don't think, this is only my second year. And I don't think that was such a major issue 4 or 5 years ago, like, what's my tax rate? Now it's like every single town in this state is talking about the tax rate. And especially after last year, when many towns passed their budgets with very, very high tax rates increases. You know, the 15 to 20% plus, which we did not suffer here, but many others did. And so if I was in a town where last year my property taxes went up 18%, I would not want them to go up 18% again, right? But, you know, all of these discussions inevitably gets directed at the tax rate, which I think is very unfortunate because it's not talking about students and it's not talking about education structures and outcomes. And I wish it was. I wish it was that easy, you know, and you could talk about this in a completely different context than how much of my tax is going to go up. Now, that being said, I'm a taxpayer in South Burlington and I have students, 2 students in high school. So all of this, and I hate to say this at every meeting, but it's very personal for me, this discussion, because I don't want to make any of these cuts, right? I wish we didn't have to, and I don't want to. But it's up to the voters to decide what they're willing to bear. And we simply don't have control over many of the factors that determine what that tax rate is going to be. So we do the best we can. And we try to strike a balance between programming and outcomes and spending, et cetera. So, you know, none of this is fun. And so I tend to editorialize everything up here, but it's really important to me.
Thank you, I appreciate it. I do have a couple more questions, if that's okay, but I know we're.
I just
at the
wanna-
price for time.
Well, do you want to,
Yeah.
we've warned this for 55 minutes and we're a little over an hour now. And we do still need to take public comment.
Yeah, that's right.
So let's try to wrap up for the discussion. I mean, but we need to also give feedback. So let's wrap up our questions.
No questions. I would say I would call for the orders of the day and continue for public comment because if we, yeah, this has been over an hour.
But we have to talk about which model the board would like to.
I thought that was next meeting. Okay, we're doing that tonight. Model 1, 2, or 3. So
I guess We need to give feedback about what direction we would like the next.
Okay, we're not.
More questions?
Are you able to describe the new teacher leadership system and how administrative roles within departments at the high school will be shifted?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, this is something that would have to be co-created by, educators and building-based leaders and, some of the folks in central office. The idea here is that teacher voice and teacher leadership is incredibly important, and it's not something that we can go without. And so if there weren't, last year we lost our middle school instructional coach. This year, there's conversations about, the potential of losing elementary instructional coaches and CAS and ITE. And, I said early on in the budget season, there's going to be big gaps. We don't have enough now, we don't have the resources that we need. And this would be a significant void. So ensuring that there's some teacher leadership in place is critically important. Increasing equity and having this be K-12 is important. So teacher leadership models include stipends for after-school leadership and teacher voice. It wouldn't be the same or a replacement for instructional coaches or ITE or CAS. It would, though, be a way to have teacher leadership and teacher voice. And a lot of those leadership teams, the teacher leadership model focuses on inclusion of a variety of different departments within each school. So, I think it would look different in each school, but the idea is to ensure that there's teacher voice and teacher leadership in some capacity, albeit significantly diminished. And there would certainly not be the same quality of supports.
Thank you. Other questions, comments from the board at this?
I'm happy to, I can probably maybe answer quickly if you've got something else.
I guess my only other question is these are some significant cuts and changes as we look at, I was looking at some of these specific reductions in roles. There were 2 cuts at the elementary level, and I apologize, I don't have all of the slides in front of me. It was 2 teachers or whatnot.
Yes.
So as I look at these, I want to make sure that we're still in, we have a policy around pupils per class and such, and we're still in alignment with that.
We're,
Or are we
so
cutting
last
close?
year, when we were looking at these same terrible reductions, we modified the class sizes. And last year, we had pretty significant cuts at the elementary level for classroom sizes. So elementary classroom sizes are high. In preparation for this budget, you see we've done that evaluation at the high school level, in the middle level, where we've looked at enrollment of every single class, tried to maintain programming. But there will be increased class sizes across the board.
Just one question or point of feedback I had for the next budget presentation. Would it be possible to get the average long-term weighted average daily membership numbers kind of in comparison with the McKibben projections? Just so we could see the difference in what we're projected to have for enrollment, and then maybe historically, maybe it would be better historically, like what our pupil counts are versus what our funding is.
Well, you're kind of mixing up 2 things. So the comparison with a long-term weighted average daily membership would have no relevance in McKibben, because it's just the number of bums on seats. Where that would have relevance is comparing it to our internal enrollment counts. Which,
I guess what I'm looking for is like, we project how many bums on seats we'll have, but that's not necessarily how much funding we'll get per student. And so
I think it's probably, I don't think that would give you the outcome yet that you're looking for, because first of all, those weights have only been in place since last year. And there's no real comparison. Pre-Act 127 and post-Act 127, but we could do it for 1 year, but it wouldn't, but comparing the McKibben data to long-term weighted ADM, just, it's not a logical comparison to make.
But
Against
I
each
guess
other, because
what
the
I'm
two
looking-
numbers don't really relate to each other. Because McKibben doesn't have any data or information to determine what the weights are. You know, they don't know how many free and reduced lunch students we have, or they don't know how many English language learners and stuff.
I guess what I'm looking for is a relationship between, we look at enrollment projections to kind of figure out what our operational needs are gonna be. And I'm thinking about 5 years from now, I could be wrong, but I think we're gonna go through 5 years of this kind of difficult funding situation. And I don't want there to be a misinterpretation of, well, this is how many students we were projected to have multiplied by how much we receive per student. And not take into account that it's, I guess I'm looking for that missing piece. Does that make sense? Like,
It makes sense, but there's no data to provide that as an increase.
yeah, okay.
It's challenging.
There's no like projected data either. There's not a McKibben's
The
report.
state is
for-
having a hard enough time to give us the data
Okay.
of what's in place today.
Yes.
And last year it took 6 versions. It's such a complicated, I mean, slight editorializing, the complexity of what the state has to do to calculate this stuff is just mind blowing to the average person. And even to me. They have overcomplicated everything. Every legal change has been complicated. The methodology is complicated, the way they get the data sources is complicated, the way they calculate the data everything is no disrespect to our legislature, but it's so complicated that it is not, the average person just can't even grasp it. You know, which is why it's always so challenging for me to try to explain it, because it's so hard, and you have to know way more than you need to know to understand how these calculations are done. And, you know, the Agency of Education does their best, but they've lost key staff in their finance area that's made this particularly complicated this season. You know, they're dependent upon people as well as computers, and the law makes it complicated to execute the calculations. But what you're asking for is perfectly rational. I can't do those numbers. I couldn't even begin to tell you what that would be. But I think it is important to track the McKibbens, like I did, to track the McKibbens projected estimates versus what's real, like how many students are actually in our schools. And for whatever reason, the estimate for how many elementary students we're gonna be is higher than what it actually is. And if you remember, those of you who were here, that data was really one of the driving points for having the Zens. Because the professional estimator was projecting a higher number of students than are there today. I do have the net ed spending figures for you, Tim.
Okay.
So this is calculating last year's net ed spending, which included this $3 million surplus with this year's net ed spending. So model 1, which was the most aggressive model, the increase in net ed spending is 13.57%. The increase in net ed spending for model 2 is 14.93%. And for model 3, it's 15.40%.
And you can send this to me in an email if you would. I'm not asking for it right now, but I'm curious, have we not taken that 3.5 million and put it against reducing the tax rate, what our ed spending rate would look like? And unfortunately, part of the issue is that we didn't make some hard choices last year. I think because of that, we would have, probably is gonna impact what our ed spending increases. And the only reason I ask this is because I think we got caught last year, really stressing the overall ed fund, and there's really a very big push to control spending. Which I know we're trying to do here, but we can't lose sight of the fact that our decisions here impact the entire state and the fund overall.
I think it would be helpful to know what that increase in spending was without the surplus as a factor, or just.
Just out of
I don't
curiosity.
think putting these numbers against statewide averages. I think that's not what's going on.
Right, well, my concern is that, if somebody hears a number like a 13.57% increase, South Burlington is increasing spending by almost 14%. And I think if you look around the rest of the area, you're seeing rates increase anywhere from 3 to 5 to 7%, right? So we stand out as an anomaly, but, behind the scenes, it's a lot because we did that huge amount of surplus last year, which is kind of, again, coming back to haunt us this year. It is what it is.
Okay, I got some more numbers for you. So if I add $3 million back into the revenue fund, as if we had this money to do all over again, the surplus, the Model 1 tax rate increase would be 0.96%. The Model 2 is 2.29%, and the Model 3 is 2.76%.
Okay, wow.
So that shows you what $3 million
To our, yeah,
Yeah, but we can't go backwards.
no,
Right,
I'm
we
not
can't- I
saying
mean,
that.
I feel like,
We have to take lessons learned though.
right, well, but I thought that was a given. That would- Okay. Sorry.
Right, I just want to put that 13% in context, right? Because I think that's critical.
Well, it's important because it's important not to look backwards, but to explain variance, it's important, and to say that the primary reason why our tax rates are at the levels that we showed them in the presentation has a lot to do with not having that $3 million in surplus to apply against it.
And folks will say, in your lowest model, you have a 14% increase all the way to 15.5, that's South Burlington, right? And then, us knowing the massive possible reductions that would be for our schools.
Thank you, Tim. I appreciate it.
Any further board discussion?
Last enough.
So how much feedback would you like from the board at this time for your budget?
We're looking for guidance and want to hear feedback from the community as well.
The board want to reserve feedback about the models until after we've heard from the public comment?
Yes.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
So just as a reminder, as we get set up here, we need to keep public comment 2 minutes per person. And if you hear a point that you wanted to make already stated, and you still want to come up after, just please try not to be redundant and repetitive. It doesn't help. And if you're online, please just raise your hand and we will get to the online participants after the in-person. So please come up to the podium, state your name for the record.
My name is Karen Bowman. This is my 26th year working for South Burlington School District. It's my 26th year being the EST coordinator at South Burlington High School. I'm speaking about the .4 EST position cut at the high school in this proposal. The role is a 40% position, so it's not part of the position being cut, it's the entire position. This position, I urge you to keep. educational support services essentially will no longer exist with elimination. Act 173 is an act relating to enhancing the effectiveness, availability, and equity of services provided to students who require additional support. Cutting this position is the antithesis of complying to Act 173. EST is a Vermont state mandated service that was designed to support any Vermont student who is struggling with academic or social emotional needs and not already identified through special ed services such as 504 or IEP. I coordinate these services every single day. We have 66 students that I case manage with current EST plans, and we are having an additional 2 referrals per week that come in. I meet with teachers, students, school counselors, families every week for state required meetings. I manage, update, and file all these plans, communicate with teachers, students, and families, all in support of student success and for equity. New EST referrals are for students whose families are concerned that their student may have a disability. State law says that in order to proceed toward an evaluation, students and families must start with the EST process. That's me with the coordination. Other referrals come in from families whose students have just been recently diagnosed with anxiety and depression or are not progressing in academic areas as they should be. Teachers regularly make referrals to the EST team when they identify a student who is struggling. This position is valuable. It speaks to creating equity, keeping equity, and supporting SEL at SP. Please do not allow this position to be eliminated. Thank you.
And else in the room who'd like to comment?
Good evening. My name is Kristen Corsell, and I am the lone instructional technology educator for the district, also known as ITE or Technology Integration Specialist, or to some students, Mrs. Chromebook or the Bebot lady. My role isn't often clear based on the title, although simply put, if it has to do with supporting students and teachers with educational technology for learning, I'm likely behind it. I've proudly served as South Burlington students and teachers for 19 years. And it's worth mentioning that while my focus is on students and teachers, I've also supported staff across our district, here in the central office, the bus garage, and even some of the school board members. I'm here to express my concern regarding the proposal to eliminate the last instructional technology education position within our district. The role is vital for enhancing student learning in an environment that is increasingly reliant on educational technology. Last year's budget eliminated my 2 colleagues, leaving me as the sole support for all of our schools this year. As you know, educational technology is no longer a supplementary tool, but a fundamental part of South Burlington students' educational experiences. The instructional technology education position directly supports the effective use of digital tools and instructional technology in classrooms, ensuring that all students benefit from engaging, innovative learning opportunities. Without this position, teachers will be left without the crucial support they need to integrate technology in their instruction, limiting their ability to create dynamic learning experiences that meet the diverse needs of all of our students. The absence of this role will directly impact students by eliminating support for access to personalized learning tools, assistive technology, interactive lessons, and the essential skill development that technology fosters. Teachers and students rely on the expertise and support of the instructional technology educator to navigate the growing number of digital tools and resources that are integral to the curriculum. This position helps educators implement innovative teaching practices, streamline lesson plans, and provide tailored learning experiences for students. In an environment like South Burlington, where technology is central to student engagement and achievement, the loss of this position will significantly hinder the district's ability to maintain its commitment to excellence of education.
I'm sorry, Krista, that's about time.
Okay,
Wouldn't mind some of this.
sure. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Megan Sweet. I'm a CAS of school counseling at South Burlington High School, a resident taxpayer. I prepared some comments tonight based on what was previously on the slides prior to this evening. And certainly recognize the difficult decisions you all have to make in balancing resources and flex priorities as a district. And I just want to acknowledge, I appreciate some of the things I was concerned about, seeing them back in the budget. Yet, I still feel the need to speak up about the cut of a school counselor. By every measure, local, state, national, we're in the midst of a youth mental health crisis. And we see that, and we work with those students and families every day at the high school. I think it's important for this board to understand the impact of such a cut at the high school. And certainly in Tim's slides, I feel it doesn't accurately represent the student caseload that we work with. Of the 804 students at the high school, there's an additional 25 students who are spending their senior year at college and early college. The only adult in the building still working with them very regularly is their school counselor. The reduction of this one school counseling position would push our caseloads close to 190 to 1 at the high school, and growing as we see the forecasted increase in enrollment over the next 2 to 3 years. I also, in thinking about the reduction of, and this is certainly not about me personally, my position, but the role that I play within our department, and the administrative tasks I'm able to take off the plates of our school counselors so that they can attend to the varied and multiple needs of our students. And so while tonight I heard that the CAS of school counseling might be put back into the budget, I don't really have a sense of how that will be separated from all the other CAS. And so I feel concerned that remains a cut potentially in this budget, resulting in even higher counselor caseloads. The impact of these cuts.
Megan, I'm sorry, that's.
Okay.
I apologize. Thank
Thanks.
you.
Hi, good evening. My name is Christy Nold. I'm in my 10th year at South Burlington School District. In my years, I've had the incredible fortune to be an instructor in heterogeneous classes at the middle and high school. This means I've worked with all students across all ability levels and who represent the range of families we serve. Several students who are participants in the Holocaust Studies course I co-teach, I've worked with in 6th grade, 9th grade, and now as 11th and 12th graders. The budget proposal slides include the line that achieving equity may require an unequal distribution of resources and services due to the impact of historic marginalization on student achievement. Further, it states that the budget must be developed to maximize equity. I can tell you without reservation that a budget that includes a reduction of paraeducators, nursing, school counselor, EST coordinator, and increased class sizes simply does not reflect the needs of our most vulnerable students. On the opposite end of the spectrum, the presentation seeks to assure the community that AP courses will be preserved. It feels notable that we are removing positions that interface with our most vulnerable youth while maintaining AP coursework. Aside from equity concerns related to that prioritization, this budget includes a full reduction to our social studies department. This represents the second full reduction in 2 years. I do not know how we can promise the community that we will provide the same course offerings, including AP, while down to full teachers. I recognize that there are factors outside of the board's control. What is within our reach is engaging in a transparent process that is honest with our community about the impact of the cuts, what we stand to lose, and the gap between our stated values and what these reductions represent. Suggesting that this budget keeps equity at the forefront feels deeply disingenuous and out of step with the needs of our most vulnerable youth. Additionally, making promises that we may not be able to maintain sets us all up for failure. Earlier this year, I wrote to Superintendent Nichols with concern. For the second year in a row, our Director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, Anti-Racism, and Social Emotional Learning was tasked with the responsibility of serving as a building level administrator. Although I believe Monica is absolutely incredible, I do not feel any person can exist in 2 places at one time. To me, this presented budget is one more example in which our central office has drifted from its stated goal of reaching all learners, serving our most vulnerable, something for which I believe we need to be more honest.
Hi, some of you guys might know me. I'm Jason Singh. I work over in the IT department as our new systems administrator. Before I get into what I'd like to say, I just want to say that the position you guys in, I can appreciate how difficult it must be. And no matter what the outcome is, it'll be uncomfortable for the district. A lot of people have invested their time and lives here, so I totally understand the sensitivity of the situation. So I'm here to advocate for keeping the IT department. Last year's budget, we eliminated 3 IT-based positions, 2 of which were ITE. After getting a chance to work in the district the past year and a half, in 2 different roles, I can see how technology-heavy SBSD is, and having enough IT staff to support the teachers and the students is crucial. Without an ITE department, we would be unable to keep teachers updated on new technology trends and serve the district the best we can on educational tools that can be used to enhance student learning. Teachers would be left with the lack of professional development on the technical side when it is something that is essential to our district. As of just this year, we've put interactive displays in 4 different schools, and IT was a significant part of that process. We are constantly looking for new ways to implement new student-facing apps, and we would not be able to be as flexible unless we had ITE. We're also considering bigger infrastructure changes, and to not have anyone to assist teachers when those changes come would be difficult, to say the least. I feel like it's easy to overlook the importance of those who work in IT outside of the help that we do face-to-face. IT also assists other members of our department with teacher and student app issues, or to help communicate information from IT to teachers. They assist in helping set up accounts before the start of the year, along with other things to help prepare teachers for the new year technology-wise. In an ideal world, it would be great if we didn't have to cut anyone, but I know that's not realistic. All we can do is vouch for ourselves and for our team. I've worked in multiple school districts, and I know our district IT team is very competent, and I know that you can trust them in continuing to provide the best technology needs for our district. I appreciate everyone's time, and thank you for listening.
Good evening. The words I'm reading tonight are actually from my friend and colleague, JP Painter. He is on the select board in his home community.
I'm sorry, would you mind identifying yourself just for the record?
Yes, I will. Thank you. My name is Phil Sirks. And I'm reading the words of JP Painter. So you might say, I am not JP Painter, but I am playing him on TV. As I was saying, he is a select board member in his town, so he's attending a different budget meeting this evening. Good evening. My name is JP Painter. I am the curriculum area supervisor for mathematics at South Burlington High School and have been teaching in South Burlington High School since 1999. I've heard a lot of talk about equity during the budget season so far. Equity is likely one of the most ubiquitous words in education today. At the last meeting, one of our board members asked our director of learning what was meant by the use of the word equity when it came to our curriculum, and I appreciated the question and the response, which aligned to the words provided in one of the early slides in tonight's presentation. Specifically, the budget must be developed to maximize equity. I'm here to call out our budget process as it stands right now, as it is not being conducted in a way that will maximize equity. The community quote-unquote themes identified in previous budget presentations being used to inform the budget process are based on fewer than 40 responses to a survey sent out to some of the South Burlington taxpayers. Any mathematician will tell you the data as it stands is currently invalid. One of our budget votes last year saw approximately 4,000 people vote of approximately 15,500 voters. The number of respondents to the survey represents approximately 1% of the folks who voted during the final round on last year's budget. There are clearly many voices that have not been heard. This process is not equitable with so few voices. One of these quote-unquote themes identified reduction of the curriculum area supervisor position at the high school. I'm not sure there are many community members who understand what a curriculum area supervisor does. Given the potential elimination of this position, while talking about an equitable process, I'm convinced that the board and perhaps our district administration don't fully understand what a curriculum area supervisor does. Tonight's slide deck named the curriculum area supervisor position as a district position. It is not. The fact that it is identified as such shows a misunderstanding of the position at best. At worst, it shows an intentional dissemination of misinformation to satisfy another quote unquote theme of reducing district level administrative positions.
Feel that's time. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Melissa Shaffey. I'm a resident of South Burlington, an SB alumni, and an art and technology educator at SBHS and FHTMS. At FHTMS, students experience a rotation of exploratory courses. STEAM is a multidisciplinary course centered on problem solving with new and current technologies. STEAM is essential to prepare students with skills in digital literacy through typing, digital navigation, AI, engineering, 3D printing, laser cutting, and digital organization. In 2023, Fab Lab at FHTMS was eliminated and replaced with a study hall. The morning exploratory rotation now includes STEAM, multimedia, studio art, and a study hall. The proposed elimination of the 0.6 FTE STEAM course leave a secondary vacancy in the morning exploratory rotation. This may result in an additional study hall, larger class sizes, and most importantly, loss in student skills with the technology they use for learning every day. STEAM is also the only proposed cut of a classroom teaching position for FHTMS within this budget. Please contemplate the greater negative impacts this will have on all student experiences and the lack of digital skills, both short and long. Despite decreases in technology education, students will continue to need current technology education for their success in their school years and beyond. Thank you.
Any other public comment in the room?
Hi, I'm Noah Everett. I'm a co-president of the South Burlington Educators Association. And I'm here to just make sure that this board has some clarity about reduction and what a reduction is. So some of the things that are being proposed appear to be kind of a shell game of where some work is going to do. And I urge the board to reduce, meaning to no longer have. So when you reduce a position, you are asking for that work not to be present in the next school year. So I think a good example is the curriculum area supervisors. If you're reducing that work, you're saying we no longer need that work. You can't then move that to another shell game of stipended leadership. If you're reducing nursing, then you can't then have a new nurse coordinator position that's going to pick up that direct nursing work. If you're reducing in any other area, do consider it a reduction. I know that these are difficult times, and I know that we're going to offer less as a program, but it's important that we are clear that what we are offering is less, not a shifting of work, whether that's EST moving to a K-12 special education coordination. Those pieces have to be owned as what they are, because the men and women who are doing this work currently and have been putting their life into it deserve that in return. So just consider that as you do consider your reductions and what we can live without. Thank you all for your time.
I'm Megan Emery. I am a parent in the district, and I came tonight because I care very much about this community, in addition to being a parent in the district. So I would be here whether or not I'm a parent in the district. I think this is a crisis in our state. What I want to say, I am an educator at UVM, and I understand very much what you have heard your faculty say to you tonight. As a faculty member, we do give our lifeblood to our vocation. And with that in mind, I still do believe that given the financial realities and the reductions that have to occur, that there are positions that are really, really essential. And it comes down to the arts, music, foreign language, in addition to the four. Language arts, social studies, science and math. And technology will follow. In order to be able to use technology, you need to understand ethics, you need to understand math, you need to understand how relationships work in our society. And those are the building blocks. Once we have that, we can then give a student a tablet or a computer and use that very powerful instrument, but with that basic knowledge of how we get along with one another and how we look for facts and how the libraries are up, because Google is just like a library. So basics are really important. And then we can build on those basics, and high school and is the place. And anyway, I also wanted to say that in order for students who are in really dire straits in their home lives, financially, socially, emotionally, mentorship is really an important thing. And I know that was cut last year. I learned that this morning. Some of these students just need an adult who can, accept them for who they are and then set limits. And I just wanted to make a pitch for that, because I do think that for students to learn, they have to be open to the learning, and they need to feel accepted and feel those limits about the acceptable behavior and just being present. So I know your job is tough. I know their job is tough. I do it every day. I feel for them. I feel for everybody. But I just had to say those words. So thank you.
Anyone else?
Am I allowed to speak as myself? It was fun. My name is Phil Sirks, for the record, science teacher in the high school for 13 years. When citing the survey, the feedback input survey, and when examining a summary of the preserved programming, it's really not difficult to discern whose voices are being heard loud and clear and whose are left out of this conversation. And the first sentence in the presentation tonight had to do with quote unquote maximizing equity in the vision statement. So if we're going to talk the talk, let's please walk the walk. And the positions that are proposed to be eliminated in this budget proposal are the ones that provide the guardrails and the supports for equity. And one other thing I noticed, there was a slide that I saw tonight for the first time about projected enrollments. It looks like in the next 5 years that high school enrollments are projected to increase by over 120 students. And that seems like the largest delta out of anywhere in the enrollment data in the district. That's 4 sections of 9. Just putting that out there. Thank you for your time.
Hi, Bridget Burkhart, resident of South Burlington. I'm just gonna make 2 very short comments. One is about enrollment data. I urge you, I've been urging it for 4 or 5 years, please get rid of McKibben. He has given us information that has been so inaccurate that it's led us to decisions that were probably decisions we might have made differently if we had not based them on his algorithm, which is not based really on Vermont reality, and especially not based on South Burlington reality. We've had multiple conversations with him to try to fix the problems with that algorithm. And if you go back and look, it looks more even than it is in terms of what his projections were versus what came out, because he just adjusts them every couple of years on our dime to make them look a little bit better. But they have been inaccurate and very challenging to use. 2, I would just urge you in future budget meetings to put some of the numbers back in. We used to do a lot more. I know that it's complicated, the education funding formula. We used to do a lot more with trying to walk the community through how we get to those numbers. So overall expenditures, where other sources of funding are coming from, how much we're asking from the ed fund, how that relates to cost per pupil, how the CLA and the yield actually impact the tax rate, and then what that means for an average taxpayer in South Burlington. I know that can be complicated or scary for some folks, but I think it's really valuable and it feels more transparent to folks who really do care about the numbers and are willing to dig into them. So that's all I have to say, really just process, and happy to ask, or if any of you have any questions or would like any further input, I will do it offline. So.
Any other comments? Can I just by a show of hands get how many more comments we have?
Hello, I'm Rachel Stern. I'm one of the Howard Center School Services clinicians, and this is my 5th year at the high school. And my comments are brief. I just have a couple questions really and looking for some clarity around the additions. And I just kind of want to reference what Noah Everett spoke to, which is that these additions, which presumably are sort of meant to not meant to address some of what the cuts will mean in terms of impact. It would be helpful, I think, to have further clarity on what the job responsibilities will really be, because in my experience working with some of the students on my caseload, there really isn't, nor as Noah referenced, like there can't be a substitute for a nurse, but really experientially having someone in the building that you're able to interact with face to face cannot possibly be replaced by someone in a remote or kind of managerial role that focuses on oversight. And so the kind of disconnect, the difference between someone across the street and someone in the building is just cannot be emphasized enough. And so it'd be helpful, I think, to think about, especially when we're really thinking critically about the budget, when we think about it, adding any sort of positions, I personally would love to understand what those responsibilities will look like more concretely. So I think I'll leave it there, and I appreciate you all for listening. Thanks. Good evening, Lindsay Hudson, school counselor at South Burlington High School. Scribbling through my notes to not reiterate anything. So one thing that I am struggling with is some contradictions that I'm trying to grapple with in the presentation, and I'm also just trying to understand it as it's shifted from what I understood it to be this morning, knowing that it's a moving target. But one piece that I wanted to point out was, you know, there was a quote wanting to prioritize critical areas of student support, and I don't see how that lines up with reducing social emotional supports, which I would say would kind of devastating in the current budget at the high school level, where it already feels like we're holding on by the skin of our teeth. The other contradiction that I am curious about is prioritizing student-facing positions, and not to reiterate, but like Rachel just said, the addition of these 2 district positions, district health supervisor and PK through 12 special ed program manager. I'm curious what those roles are, and if they would be in one of the school buildings, student facing. Just anecdotally, our student support services CAS, which I believe is also on a list of getting cut, is integral in the daily operations of ensuring that our media students are getting the support they need on a day-to-day basis. That is constant juggling and needs like somebody on the ground in the high school, absolutely. The other piece that I'm curious about is CAS being listed in the district, not in the high school. I think in looking at the impact of the high school and how it runs operationally, it is pretty devastating, the dismantling that's being talked about, and with no clear plan of how that is going to work otherwise. I'm really concerned about that and all of the roles that those CS positions hold. And finally, I just want to add some concern, which hasn't come up at all, I don't think about. There was a personal finance graduation requirement that was approved by the board a few years ago that next year's graduating class of 2026 is the first class that will have that requirement in addition to the other existing graduation requirements. And currently, after losing a full-time social studies teacher last year, which is the department that now holds personal finance, and another full-time social studies teacher being on the cut list for this coming year. This year, we had to prioritize seniors because of the reductions. And so we're looking at needing to get pretty much all 220 something rising seniors
in an additional 0.5 requirement that we currently don't have the FTE for, and so I'm just curious if the board is
Lindsay, that's time.
aware of that. Thank you.
Any other public comment in the room? We unmute Polly and repeat, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
She's talking over muted.
Sorry, for some reason, I cannot hear you. I don't know if you can hear me.
We can hear you.
Okay, super. Thank you. Thank you all very much for your time on this. I do serve Polly Vanderputten. I teach German and French at South Burlington High School. I do serve on the board in another district, and we are also currently going through a lot of budget conversations. So I absolutely empathize with the challenges that you are facing with this. It is not easy anywhere. I wanted to speak to a couple of things and ask a couple of questions about the proposed budget cuts, specifically about the curriculum area supervisors, the CAS position. Some of the conversations that we have been having in the high school have been around things like who will be conducting teacher evaluation, because this is something the CAS people do. Teacher evaluation is essential to holding teachers accountable, to making sure that they're doing the best possible job. And it's very time consuming to do it well. So that's something we're on a 3-year cycle for at the high school, and I have found it to be one of the more functional aspects of our building. Another thing that the CAS position does is manage department budgets. They look at professional development and best practices and bring it to the department. And they serve as a bridge between the administration and the teachers. They themselves are teachers, so anything that comes in as a new idea or something we need to work on is something that they are living through, and then they are able to communicate between teachers and administration. My experience with it has been that it's essential, and I would just ask the question, if we do not have these positions anymore, who is going to do this? Who is going to hire new teachers? Who is going to evaluate teachers? Who is going to navigate between parents and teachers? Who is going to manage professional development and budgets for departments? We don't have an answer to that yet. The second thing I would like to say is about mental health. We are not really quite yet out of pandemic behaviors, meaning we still see students who are struggling. And I have found some of the people I have most closely worked with in helping my students have been the 9th grade dean, the SAP counselor, the EST coordinator, and the school counselors in particular. So I am wondering, if teachers do not have these resources anymore, who is going to provide them? Because they are the difference between a 9th grader being successful and making it to 12th grade or not. This has been my experience with it. Thank you very much for listening. I really appreciate your time, and I do fully empathize with the challenges of this process.
That's gonna wrap public comment for this evening. It is 8:13. So we will take a quick break for 5 minutes and come back at 8:18. All right, we're gonna bring the meeting back together now. We are still on agenda item 8, FY26 budget. So at this point, we've heard from the community, we've heard from our administration, and as a board, I don't want to drag this out, but I think that we each need to weigh in on which model we'd like to see the administration continue with for our next budget.
Would it be too much to ask for kind of just a recap of the models? I'll be honest, I don't fully understand the difference between the two, and like, why are they bucked and like pre-selected? Like, can I
Can you move parts around?
I
Yes,
don't
thank
Oh,
you.
yes,
I
yeah,
just
yeah.
wanna say, I don't think this is like a menu selection kind of thing, because it's my understanding that each line item, not only is that not really like a board jurisdiction, but it has financial impacts that might not mesh with another aspect of, let's say, the model. So, but also the way I see this is like Model 1 is the most reductions, and then Model 2 and Model 3 add some back. So, in the, with an eye on the clock, I'd just like to ask the board to, I mean, add as much info as we need to, but give some feedback about which model you'd like to see the administration move forward with.
I'd like to see Model 3. I think I'm in a building every day as well, and yes, and I think we did just hear, like, add everything back. Gosh, that would be really great. I would love that. We need to campaign for that and have a societal shift. But I'm hoping that because I'm looking at fewer athletic reductions, fewer instructional support reductions. I mean, these are things that keep kids in school and keep them engaged. And that's what I would advocate for, and I'm like, and hopefully we can, our surrounding communities are, supporting their budgets. I'm hoping that South Burlington will as well. So I think it's really important. That's my vote.
I would agree. With my not totally new eyes, but basically new eyes, that seeing, that fleshed out would be good. And then when we have more as the numbers change from the state, maybe we have to go back again, but I also agree with, Bridget, that seeing the actual numbers would help.
I actually wondered if you would have some perspective on that demographic report. I won't put you on the spot by any means.
Well, I mean, I don't know anything about specifically, but I am sitting here wondering, we know physically how many children, how many pupils we have. And there are models, that you can use based on the number of 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, that maybe we can come up with something that we think is a better, I don't know if we're even allowed to do that, but it's not impossible. We have most of the information at our fingertips.
That project to go through.
Oh, fun.
Chris or Tim?
Capital Reserve Fund is a priority. I think the message was loud and clear from the community that they want to use Honda for a while, and you're gonna have to do your oil changes and set aside money for repairs. And if you don't set aside money for repairs, that debt service will reduce our ability to deploy that money for education. Just that aside, I'd like to say add everything back in. I'm not there. I think there's been some decent recommendations that I think just doing the status quo doesn't make sense. And I think it's time for us to take a hard look and look at the way we do business and deliver education in the, I shouldn't say this, like deliver education in the school district. I'm curious, but one comment that really stood out to me was the cutting of services that help marginalized communities while maintaining some of the AP stuff, like just that message. Just kind of understanding some of these recommendations would be helpful. It just that really stood out to me. The special education piece, there were some great recommendations. But everything else is kind of on the table, I think. That's just, but that doesn't fit one of these three. So I don't.
Well, instructional supports, that would be 2 or 3, right? Fewer, well, model 2 provides some instructional supports. Model 3 preserves instructional supports. Am I right? Yeah, wrong, okay, so,
Model 2 or 3.
yeah,
Yeah, and but model 1 doesn't. Like, but model 2 doesn't include some of the facility stuff, right?
It does.
does?
There's 250,000 included for the capital reserve, account for each,
in model 2, so model 3 is in addition to model 2. So it's in there.
Yeah,
For clarity's sake, the capital reserve fund is included in each of the models.
so the special education, that whole bubble. Like, that's, there's some adding, special ed, adding interventionists, that's fantastic. It addresses some of the concerns, so I'm not clear like where that falls on which of these models.
So that's, so the positions we talked through tonight are all in model 1.
Yeah.
So everything included there, all the changes are model 1. Model 2 would be adding more supports back in, and model 3 would be adding even more supports back in. So everything you see would be the minimum under model 1.
So the special education, add the staff for the 8 positions here
All model 1,
would be in model 1.
yes.
And it would not be model 2 or model 3.
It would be in all the models, and model 2 and 3 would be even greater support. So it would give us the ability to preserve a lot of the many more positions.
Yeah, all right, thank you.
Would it be in the wrong spirit to, when you're trying to compare, let's say, the software options that we're gonna subscribe to, and you go down the checklist and it shows you what's included in this version? Maybe that would be a good way to compare these. I don't know if that's in the wrong spirit, because when you get to select which software, it's like, oh, well, no matter what, I'm getting a service I'd like to have, but it might be helpful just for clarity's sake of seeing like capital reserve fund is included in that really. Tim?
Sure, couple of comments first. I appreciate the modeling, but I kind of don't want to speak to model 1, 2, or 3. I want to make sure that we're not currently emphasizing or placing a lot of emphasis on the tax rate, because that number is so ambiguous at this point that to start saying we're going to go with a particular approach based on what we perceive the tax rate to be at this point is really putting the cart way before the horse. I guess what I'm very interested in is understanding the overall spending increase that we're going to have from fiscal year 25 to fiscal year 26. And again, in light of the overall education fund, I think we just need to be very conscientious of any pressure we're putting on that unnecessarily. Yet saying that, I don't see that in this budget. I mean, it's an increase for us, but again, we artificially suppressed it last year quite a bit. But we are essentially, if I'm not mistaken, regardless of what we do, going to be looking at a double-digit increase on what we're demanding from the ed fund. So that definitely is of a concern that I have. That said, as I look at some of the proposed cuts and everything, I want to recognize what Noah said about administrative work. Not necessarily, it's either got to be done or it's gone, right? So I am not an expert on the administrative work that's being done and what those decisions mean, and I will defer, of course, to your expertise on that. But I do recognize that, and I want to acknowledge that, because it's the work is there, the work is being done, and where does it go if or it goes away, and what the impact potentially would be. So I definitely want to echo that concern that I have. Not that and I think we've heard from the community as well, that if we're going to make cuts, they would prefer to see it on the administrative side, but we have to recognize the potential impact to our students on that. I don't want to speak to necessarily particular positions in the cuts. I do have concerns around cutting nursing, cutting a counselor. I see those as very directly tied to student supports. And from an equity perspective, I would think that some of our neediest people do rely on nursing and on counselors and counselors. And I'm not sure if, the number that was mentioned, the 190 to 1, that's a huge, that's not even possible, right? But again, I'm not sure exactly what that means, so I just voiced that concern as we look at the overall changes. I agree with Chris, I think, that we do need to, the facilities, we need to start very focusing on that. We've kind of put the, swept it under the carpet for a couple of discussions here, but that's something that I'm glad we are focusing on in the budget as we go forward. So I wish we weren't even talking about cuts at this point, but that's where we're at. So from my perspective, those are the aspects that I really look at. So I guess if we were to look at sort of where you're heading here, Violet, I'm leaning more towards Model 1 with a taste of Model 2, where we're bringing back in some of those direct supports. And with an eye on what can we retain administratively, so we're not really damaging, some of that cross-pollination that's happened, vertical, whatever.
Anything else from the board? I think, if I could have had a crystal ball last year, I don't think I would have made the same recommendations that I made last year, just looking at what it's done to us this year. And it feels disingenuous for me to sit here and say, these look way better than I thought they were gonna look a month and a half ago, but also knowing that they could change to exactly what we're most afraid of very quickly. And while we may be looking at net and like increase in spending, we're looking at reduction in services, period. So I have got to, I think this year, I would like to support Model 1. I don't want to be in a position where we have told the community that we think the tax rate is going to be one thing and that it is vastly different. I just see all of these as enormously painful. I don't think that the board has the perspective necessarily to know things like caseload. So like you're citing 190 to 1 caseload, what does the work for one of those 190 look like? Is it, I just think having the board have that kind of a granular discussion is just very misguided. I think we have to really look at year over year, what are we going to ask our community to support? How are we going to fund it? I just think this is going to be painful no matter what. And it sounds like we have a balance of Model 2 and 3, Model 1 leaning. And so I think that's your conglomerate, advice back is, I think you have a balanced perspective on the board right now. And that's not a super clear directive, but perhaps it's helpful in understanding.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's really helpful and it's heartening. Model 1 would be very hard for our students and staff. And so I am hearing the feedback and hearing it's more leaning toward a Model 2, and there's compromise in there, and hopefully that will appeal to taxpayers and also support students. So thank you for the feedback.
Ditch McKibben, was that a consensus? It's really misleading, like the
Yeah.
further you get away from the projection, like it's just.
I would absolutely agree.
Yeah, our last report from him was 2024, and I elected not to do one this year, so we've already moved away from it. It's
right.
just the most recent one, so
Yeah, it's a lot of money. I don't know how much it is.
$5,000.
Can I just sort of follow up, as he said, like, this is gonna be really difficult on our students and staff, and I just wanna say that, like, I fully recognize that. And I think that the more we shy away from these hard conversations every year, the worse the next year is going to be. And that's what I'm feeling this year. Is last year, I wish that we had made some different choices, because I don't think this year would have to be as harsh. And so I hope that next year if I sit here, it's that we are trying to lessen the pain each year and not just pushing the pain off further each year as we go, so. Anything else? If that is it for FY 26 budget, I just want to make sure, since I was not in the room when any amendments were made, what would be next?
I think we had talking about the finance committee and such. I would offer that we strike that for this agenda.
Okay.
And move that to it.
So amenable to us forward. Does that mean we're on to agenda planning? Item 10, agenda planning, set agenda for January 8th meeting. So we're gonna add. The finance committee is already on for discussion.
Yet, and is there a topic in there around community engagement on the budget?
Sure, do you want that in discussion?
Yeah, in discussion, just a discussion item.
Did you say community engagement around the budget?
Yes. So we get thinking about how we as a board and as a we will engage.
That brings us to agenda item 11, and I'd like to do something a little different that I've learned from some other boards and board members. Are there any questions about anything on the consent agenda?
No.
Karen, normally I would go point by point on consent agenda, but it seems like it's unnecessary and kind of a time waster. So instead, I'm just gonna ask if anyone has any questions, and that's for minutes, AP orders, anything that we need to approve. If you have questions, this is the time to ask. If you concerns, anything, if not, then I will just say the consent agenda items are approved. Nice and efficient. Which brings us to agenda item 12, adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn the regular meeting of the South Burlington School Board on December 18th, 8:37 p.m.
Move.
Chris moves, do I have a second?
I'll second.
Laura seconds, any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.